Hi, and thank you all for joining us today. We are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 on the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited because while this is a pre-recording, it will air tomorrow, and I'm super excited about being able to have two shows with this network. And today I'm so thrilled because I have with us Preston Dennett, and I've had the privilege of interviewing him, I think, 2 times before. So definitely head on over to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled and check out our other interviews, because I promise you, you will find them riveting. Preston Dennett, let me tell you a little bit about him, and I think it's noteworthy to read some of his bio to you. He began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and his coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for Mufon, the Mutual UFO Network, and he's also a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 30 of his books, which you need to check out. I will make sure that I have all the links in the description of this video to his website and to where you can grab some of his books. I promise you, they're awesome reading. Several of his books have been Amazon UFO bestsellers, and his articles have appeared in numerous magazines. His writing has been translated into several different languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. He's appeared on numerous radio and TV programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, and other History Channel, UFO Hunters, and I think Ancient Aliens as well. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. So you get the drift. Preston Dennett is super famous and super intellectual when it comes to these topics. So let me bring Preston on board. Preston, howdy.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, it's always a thrill to be able to speak with you. Now, we've talked about other topics before, out-of-body experiences, NDEs, UFOs, and I have absolutely loved every one of those conversations. But today, I wanted to talk to you about your paranormal experience, because you have a lot of it. You've done a lot of, I guess, ghost hunting or paranormal research, and I want to get your take on a lot of it. Everybody has varying perspectives on it, and I spoke to you a little bit about it before, and I like your line of thinking and way of thinking kind of aligns with mine. So let's get started. So let's have you, from what I didn't read to folks, I'm going to give you the stage for a minute and just talk about, your life's experience and work, stuff that I might have left out. So you go ahead. I'm going to remove myself and you talk about yourself for a minute or two.
All right. Well, let's see. Thanks for the intro. It's very cool. It's funny. Every time I hear that intro, I think of the fact that my book has been translated into Icelandic. I actually was surfing the internet and found my book in Icelandic and notified the publishers, who, of course, published it in English, and they didn't even know about it. That's just an aside. Well, let me see about myself. I'm 5 of 6 brothers and sisters, and I grew up very skeptical of this subject, the UFOs and paranormal, life after death. Didn't believe in any of it. Did have a weird psychic experience as a 9-year-old kid where I knew all the answers to a game show. I always remind my sister of it because she was a witness. And at the time, I didn't know what psychic meant. We just thought it was hilarious that somehow I knew the answers to this game show. It's called Treasure Hunt. You had to guess which box the $70,000 check was in, or $50,000 or what have you. So that was kind of my first introduction to anything paranormal or psychic, but it just slid right past me. And I didn't think anything of it until years later. Very skeptical of all this stuff all the way up to age 21. I will say when I was about 13 years old, my brother Mark came running into the house, my older brother. I have 3 older brothers. And he's like, I saw a UFO. And I just thought to myself, well, no, you didn't. So the UFOs don't exist. Even at that age, I was really heavily into science. I knew how far away the stars were. And just the idea of traveling interstellar distances was inconceivable to me, certainly with our technology. So I just kind of dismissed it. I'm like, no, you couldn't have seen a UFO. Didn't happen. I don't want to hear it. But that changed when I was 21 years old. I'll never forget this. November 17, 1986. There was a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. And that intrigued me enough to ask my brother Mark about his sighting. And he described this incredible encounter with a very low-level metallic disc with colored lights. And he had 2 friends with him. And I ended up talking to them as well. And they confirmed his story. That's kind of what sent the ball rolling. I found out that I knew quite a few people in my family, my friends, my coworkers who had had experiences. So I started buying every book I could on this subject, trying to disprove them, and couldn't. Found out that UFOs are real. There's a government cover-up. I ended up joining Mufon, became a field investigator about 2 years, a year and a half after all of this, and started investigating my own cases. Really dove deep into this. I mean, it started consuming more and more of my time. Mind you, I'm working full time during all this because, there's not a whole lot of money in UFO research, or really any, I should say. But I did start writing articles for magazines, and I investigated for 10 years, just full force. Wrote about 30 articles. Finally wrote my first book in 1996 about UFO healing cases, and pretty much haven't looked back from there. Wrote 1 book per year on the average. Immediately started diving into the paranormal because it became clear to me right off the bat that there is a connection there. It's not just UFOs. There's very important consciousness aspects, ghosts, out-of-body experiences, levitation, Bigfoot, near-death experiences, all kinds of stuff is connected to all this. And one last thing I will say is it wasn't enough for me to read books on this subject or even talk to people, which was thrilling. I wanted to see it myself. So I did start having UFO sightings, and I did start going to haunted places and seeing ghosts and places where Bigfoot was hanging out and all of this because I wanted to see it myself. And I did.
That's so awesome. All right, okay, before we jump into that, I had to ask you this about that Air Force veteran, Jake Barber. I'm sure you've heard about what's
Sure.
going on in the UFO community. I mean, I got to watch the documentary that they put out where they released that egg-shaped video. I just want to get your, as a ufologist, I want to get your take, just if you don't mind, your perspective on all this whistleblower stuff happening, especially with him, because he's a pretty reputable dude. He's a badass. So what's your take on the whole thing?
Yeah, well, kudos to any whistleblower, really, honestly, because it is a big deal to put your reputation on the line, your career, your retirement, in some cases, your actual safety. So I have great respect for anyone, particularly from the military, who's crossing that line, going public with their experiences. It's very hard to verify all this stuff from my perspective as a UFO researcher, because I want to talk to him. I want to dive deep. I want to know what proof he has. How did he come across this video? It's my understanding he didn't take it, but he's had personal experiences. He's getting a whole lot of pushback on the internet. People are losing their minds over this.
Yeah.
Which is always a red flag to me when someone's heavily attacked. Like, Why would they attack him so heavily?
Right.
So, and to me, it's inevitable that information like this comes out sooner or later.
Mm.
But I know from experience, and this is where I'm a little jaded, and I'm giving pushback myself, that I feel like disclosure is very tightly controlled. I feel like people who are coming forward sometimes are, I guess you might put it, sanctioned or being allowed to come forward. Because if you were truly a whistleblower exposing information that they didn't want exposed, you probably wouldn't have the opportunity to do it.
Right.
It would, rub you out and make it look like an accident. I don't know. I don't want to say that completely, because I think if he were to say be prosecuted for violating an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, that's going to draw attention to him and basically validate his experience. So perhaps they're just like, you know what? There's too much truth coming out. We can't stop it. We're just going to let this ride. But, I don't know. This isn't what, for me, the end game of disclosure is not a picture of a craft or an eyewitness testimony or even a photograph or a film. I want to see the craft itself. I want to see the Roswell craft in a museum. I want to see the bodies. I want to be able to touch it. To me, that's the end game. And I know that's a lot to ask. But people are saying, disclosure is happening. And yeah, it is. But this is a tiny step. I'm really excited, though, because it's my understanding that, people have a lot of interest now in coming forward, whistleblowers, and that there's a lot of them.
Right.
Hundreds, if not thousands. So the avalanche of truth is coming forth. And I think what we're going to see, honestly, is the government UFO cover-up. And I say government in quotes, the high levels of the military industrial complex, the intelligence agencies, all these folks behind the cover-up. It's not necessarily the president or Congress.
Right.
But I feel like the cover-up itself is going to collapse under the weight of its own lies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is good news. I'm pretty excited to see what comes of this. Kudos to Jake Barber for coming forward. I hope this is not disinformation or propaganda. I know there are some people who are like, well, this is one of our own craft. Stephen Greer put that out.
Yep.
And I think Dolly Safran, who I'm closely associated with, also thinks that this is our own reverse engineered military craft.
Oh, she does. I was itching to ask her about that egg-shaped
Yeah, I don't know. But I have to trust her, having, she validated her experiences to me in a way that's unimpeachable. I mean, I actually had my own experiences, so I know if she's for real. I have to take her information seriously.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of on the fence about it. But yeah, a great step forward. Let's keep the ball rolling. Let's take, the cover-up has to end at some point. It just has to. It's not sustainable.
True. I agree with that. But, at the end of that video, Arrow had a disclaimer about the whistleblower, about him, and, kind of like denying it. So that always makes me pause, because there wasn't like a sentence in there saying that, what he's saying might be true. There was no indication whatsoever. It seemed like an absolute disclaimer, the type that you read, So I don't know. I mean, it kind of freaked me out too, how sick he got from, I guess you have to watch the video for folks that haven't seen it yet. I'll put the link in the description so you guys can watch it. It's really riveting. But he also got very bad, like I guess what they called radiation poisoning. So there were two things that really struck me about his testimony. Well, three. He has a team of people, badass guys that work for the military that vouched for him. Even a colonel, I think one of them was, saying that what he was saying was the truth. And then he got very, very sick after what they called the mystery box. He transported that. He did not know. This wasn't the egg-shaped one. It was a different one. What are they called? They're 8-sided craft. Adagon?
Octagon?
No, they're called a weird name like Adagons or some strange name. Yeah, that's what they're called. And he said one of them was, I think, in this mystery box. And he had this mystical experience.
Yeah.
That kind of blew me away too, where he felt, and I thought of Dolly because she talked about this feminine biologic that guided her and like was like mother, I guess she called her, right?
Right.
You were in your book there, of course. And of course, I'll have the link to that book as well so folks can check it out. So yeah, there were certain aspects of his testimony that really blew me away. Clint from The Night Shift, he has an awesome UFO channel that he primarily, YouTube channel. He talks about a lot of UFO related topics. I'll be speaking with him shortly. He brought out a good point that this euphoric feeling could have been a trick that these entities make you think to calm your spirit and make you think that like they're on your side. But then every time I think about Dolly's testimony and what Dolly has been through, it kind of, see, that's what confuses me, because I really believe in what happened to Dolly her whole life. And then you hear these other points that seem a little counterintuitive to that. So I don't know. It's so confusing.
I agree. And we know that there's disinformation in this field. Yeah. So you have to be really careful. And I just don't buy the ET threat narrative. They've been around forever. And I've talked to so many people. And yeah, it can be very scary to have contact. I absolutely understand that. But I think if you take a deep dive into particularly the onboard experiences, and not just Dolly's experience, I've talked to a lot of people, and I don't see any evidence that they're deceptively tricking people into feeling love or anything like that. I've talked to people who've said that they have felt a love like they've never felt before.
Yeah, he said.
Yeah, and I think this is genuine. This is my assessment. You know, I urge everyone to do their own research, you know, walk your own path towards truth and knowledge.
Right.
It's a tricky path, this one. But I can tell you from my own research does not support the ET threat narrative or ET out to deceive or hurt people. Really, you know, my first book was all about healing cases. That's not being covered in the media.
Right.
You know, it's just the disinformation game is so clever.
Yeah.
They will put out truth and then sandwich it with lies, or put out lies and put kernels of truth in there. So it's a tricky.
That was a great book you wrote too about the healing incidences. So I definitely recommend folks go check it out. And again, I'll put anything we talk about today. I'm going to try to make sure I link to it in the description for folks. But yeah, I wanted to get your take on the whole disclosure. And then you've got Stephen Greer, who, you know, seems like he tries to make it about him. He called it a tabloid interview. And it's so confusing. I don't like all this infighting either that's going on in the community. It's disheartening to see.
It's like that in every community. So I don't think, you know what I mean? Any field of science, there's infighting, which is such a shame. Because if we could just, it would be great if we could just come to a baseline consensus of some things. I think we have, with the idea that they're real. But even people are arguing about, are they even extraterrestrials? I'm like, come on. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are not the craft and the bodies enough to confirm that at least some of what's going on is extraterrestrial in nature? To call it NHI is annoying to me. I'm like, why not just use the term extraterrestrial? Let's stop using all these euphemisms and, you know.
What I really think is cool is he also talked about what's it called? Psychotronics. where they're using their ESP abilities
Yep.
to contact these entities and bring these ships within sight, and that whole thing is absolutely fascinating. That's a part of what, remote viewing, or maybe you could explain a little bit about that to folks. It's done through psychic abilities, right?
Right. Yeah. And some of, I of course watched that interview, and I'm skeptical of, them being able to quote fool ETs and make them think.
Right.
Certain, because these guys are very advanced. They know what's going on. So I don't buy that part. But yes, absolutely, consciousness plays a huge role in contacting ETs and CE5 movement. We'll go out and try to call down UFOs, and they're using flashlights and stuff. That's just a minor tool. It's all about telepathy. It's all about consciousness. It's all about reaching out to them. And it absolutely 100% works. There are enough testimony, enough cases out there, I think, to solidify that. I've certainly experienced it myself a number of times as part of the LA CE5 group. Stephen Greer came to LA in 1994, I think it was, 3, thereabouts. And yeah, we formed a little group, and there was a core of about 5 or 10 of us. We'll go out every other month or so, and occasionally we would have some amazing sightings by meditating and basically reaching out mentally, telepathically, and calling out, for contact. It absolutely works.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I've tried it a few times myself, but and I know that there are very gifted folks that have very powerful ability to do this. And the fact that the government has, which I totally believe it was being run out of the Pentagon, that they have this program. So they believe it too, Preston, right? I mean, they're as well.
100%. Yeah. We know that they're looked into remote viewing a long time ago.
Yeah.
And researched out-of-body experiences as well, which are intrinsically, they're integrally connected. They're very close to the same thing, remote viewing. And we did a show on it, I think, in out-of-body experiences. So absolutely, they know about it and are putting forth all kinds of time, money, and effort to study it.
Right.
I think they're taking all of this stuff very seriously, especially behind the scenes. And now we're just starting to get glimpses into it. It's very encouraging. It's pretty unprecedented to have this kind of open discussion of this subject. Yes. So yeah, it's a new era.
We're fortunate to be able to witness a lot of this. I mean, this has been going on for decades, right? Where, we've had these massive cover-ups by global governments, not only the United States, but I think it's definitely been a global initiative to hide the truth from us. So it's a pretty cool time, definitely.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. Having been in this field, it's pushing 40 years, if you can believe it. I'm like, wow. Oh my God. So I am just thrilled to see, movement in an official, capacity, because it hasn't been for decades and decades, but now we're actually seeing it. I'm like, wow, look at this. It's very cool.
Cool. Jake Barber was they showed a few minutes of his new team of what were they called, Skywatchers, I think. Yep. Right. Yep. And he said stay tuned, a lot of exciting things are coming, so that was kind of hopeful. So he's got more, I guess, evidence that they're gathering and documentation. What was scary is when he was talking about those Panasonic hard drive boxes, that the hard drives were missing. And he thinks that, he said they were like almost assassinated with that whole recovery of those. And that supposedly there was all this UAP footage on these hard drives it was crazy. So I recommend folks definitely watch that if they haven't. It was absolutely riveting.
It's going to be an interesting year.
It is. Definitely. So let's talk about how you crossed over from I know that you always felt this connectivity between dimensions, say with paranormal, Bigfoot, UFOs. But when did you actually start doing, like, let's call it a strange highness kind of research? Where did you go to haunted locations with equipment and that kind of thing? Tell us about how you got started in that.
Yeah, I was never really a techie guy. I didn't really have the funds to buy all the, all the ghost equipment and stuff. But very early on, I started improving my interview techniques. Where initially I would be like, okay, tell me about your UFO sighting, and that would be it. But as I started, really just letting the witness talk, I'm like, I would ask them anything else strange connected to this. And almost every time they would be like, well, I did have a near-death experience before my encounter or after, or I started having out-of-body experiences, or, I've also seen a lot of ghosts. I have mediumistic abilities. And so the others would say, well, I've had a lot of precognition. I'm like, oh my gosh. So really early on, I mean, within the first 20 or 30 interviews of people I did, I realized there was a connection here going on. So I started really diving deep into that, because when I came into this field, people were very concerned about nuts and bolts. Let's prove this as being real. Mm. And you weren't hearing any high strangeness. You weren't hearing about the paranormal aspect or the spiritual aspect or any of it.
Right.
In fact, later found out that high profile researchers were in fact editing out this kind of stuff. A person's spiritual experiences that were connected to their onboard experience. They weren't talking about it. They weren't going to talk about the out-of-body experience aspect or the clairvoyance or any of this, which to me is a huge mistake, because you need all the information if you want to solve any mysteries. I mean, you know what I mean? The data needs to be uncorrupted if you want to figure out what's going on here. And I kind of get it, because it's a big pill to swallow to say, well, I saw ETs and I started seeing goats afterwards. And now I'm going out of body and I can read minds and, I've got mediumistic abilities and Bigfoot. I stayed away from the whole Bigfoot aspect because I was scared it might be real. Like, I just can't get into this now. This is too much even for me as an objective researcher. But it wasn't long before I got my first Bigfoot case that was directly connected to a UFO encounter, because there is a connection between UFO and Bigfoot as well.
Let's talk about how I've heard that from so many other investigators too. What was your experience with that? Like, how did that unfold for you?
Yeah, I was, I'd certainly heard of Bigfoot, and I had a sneaking suspicion it was real, because I'd started to realize that we all have sort of a belief system that censors out anything that's contrary to our worldview, and you won't pay attention to it. Right. So I stopped doing that. My belief system literally collapsed when I found out UFOs were real. I had to rebuild it, and it kept collapsing because I'd find out new stuff, to the point where, you know what, belief systems aren't helpful. I just need to know what's true. And what I know, I can know. I'm just not going to believe anything. I can only know what I know. Mm-hmm. And so I started being really, even ironically, more skeptical of things, because I had to reevaluate everything. So I was building sort of like this picture in my mind of what contact is and what it involves and how it is related to the paranormal and consciousness. And Bigfoot, was kind of circling around because I would hear about it. I'm like, well, I'm just not going to look into that because I don't know these people. But I heard of cases, certainly, where Bigfoot would. But then I got my own case. Robert Murphy was his name, a radiologist from Canyon Country, which is outside of LA, on the edge, bordering the Los Angeles National Forest. And you might not realize it. LA is extremely populated. I mean, it's, I think there's like 20 million people in this megalopolis, right? But right on the northern border of it is the LA National Forest, which is, I forget, 500,000 acres of wild. Wow. I mean, it's a lot of area here. And I didn't know it at the time, but there's a huge history of Bigfoot in this area. And this guy's house was in a pretty unincorporated rural area on the edge of the forest. And he was a great witness, very analytical, described how he had a UFO land in his backyard. And it was very brief, just blue and white lights flashing. He was nearsighted, went to grab his glasses, came back, and the thing had gone. But whatever it was a big machine. There's no lights back there. There's no buildings.
Right.
And he's like, wow, what the heck was that? And it was the very next night that his dogs, he had 4 dogs, started going absolutely crazy for something outside in that same area, same exact spot. And he had this weird telepathic link up and knew it was a Bigfoot. He could read its mind.
What?
He told me this. I'm like, that was my reaction. Like, what? Now I know that this is regularly reported in Bigfoot encounters. There's a telepathic aspect to this that even, Bigfoot researchers aren't talking about because of this same bias. We're trying to just prove the Bigfoot and they don't want to get into the paranormal aspect.
Right.
Such a shame because it keeps turning up. In future accounts, I would certainly run into it. So he's describing this. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is strange. And he's like, yeah, no, I'm telling you, it could read my mind. It did not like the dogs. He knew I was there and I knew he was there. And this thing roared, he said, for about 20 seconds. I've since had my own Bigfoot encounter. I heard it roar too. So I know now what he's talking about when he said it resonated in your chest. He said this was, there's wildlife in the LA National Parks. There's bear, there's cougar, there's coyotes. Yeah. We had a cougar who lived next to our house. The cougar Mercury commercials were for cars. Had a cougar. Well, that cougar lived next to my house in Topanga Canyon. We would hear it roaring all the time. I know what a cougar sounds like. And I'm all about bears. I was at the zoo once when a lion roared right next to me. Oof. I'd never heard anything like that. So I know what this guy's talking about when he says this was not any of those. And this persisted for an hour or two, and then off it went. And he went out there the next morning and found footprints. It was pretty hard-packed soil, so it wasn't conclusive. But for him, it was enough. And he says, well, that's not the end of it. Do you want to hear more? I'm like, yes, tell me everything. He's like, well, he says, I swear this is connected to it, and I don't understand how. But we had a poltergeist outbreak in the weeks following this. Right away, we started having doors opening and closing, lights going on and off, footsteps, all kinds of crazy stuff, your basic paranormal infestation. So that was my first, okay, this is undeniable. I have got to start looking into it.
I have Bigfoot barking over here.
Very cool. The dogs always have to make an appearance. Right. We love our babies.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely connected. And boy, I'd later get another case that was, oh my God, strange this way. So that was the first one. And that got me into researching Bigfoot.
Let me just back up a little. This fellow saw, he had paranormal activity in his home. And then a week or two later, he had an encounter with Bigfoot.
No, first came the Bigfoot. No, first came the UFO.
The UFO, then the paranormal.
No, first UFO, next night Bigfoot, over the next week.
Oh.
Paranormal activity. So it's to deny the connection here would be biased and unscientific. You really have to accept the data. And if it were a single case, I'd be like, okay, it's what we would call an outlier, which as a scientist would be basically thrown out. Or it has to be what we call significant. It has to rise above 10% of the reportings. Otherwise, it's just too rare that it could be, a red herring or an outlier or misinterpreted. But no, this is not unusual. So something is going on here that people don't quite understand. And it took me years to come up with any kind of viable, even theory as to what's going on here. And I think I've got a pretty good handle. This is only my assessment on what the connection is.
Yeah.
Because there are some researchers who have gone, I consider, off the deep end with this and saying, you know what? These aren't ETs. This isn't Bigfoot. These aren't ghosts. This is an intelligence that's wearing different masks. I'm like, wait, what? Like, yeah, this is sort of a theory that was put forth originally by John Keel, I think, but certainly promoted by Jacques Vallée in particular, who kind of moved away from the extraterrestrial explanation of UFO activity. Not entirely, because he's researching crash retrieval cases. So come on. I'd really like to talk to him and get a little bit of clarity on this. But this has become the second most popular theory. And there's quite a few people who prescribe to it. I'm not one of them. I think we have Bigfoot living on this planet. I think there are interdimensional creatures that we would call little people, or fairies, or gnomes, or elves even, or what you want to call them. It's different in each culture. And certainly ghosts. Oh, yes. Angelic beings, demonic beings, all separate entities with some incredible commonalities and bleed-throughs that are very difficult to understand. But initially, it's like really puzzling. Like, what is going on here? Why do I keep getting people who are taken on board and come back, and the paranormal comes crashing over them in a huge way? Here's another example. I had interviewed this lady from Mount Rainier, Washington, and she had this little silver-suited being come into her house, and it started out with lights coming in through the window and a big buzzing noise, and she's like, everyone she's in an apartment building in the middle of the city. She's like, people have to be hearing this. This is crazy. And she suddenly can't move, and in walks this 4 foot tall little silver-suited ET, little humanoid, an entity. And she blacks out, wakes up. She's lying on top of the covers. She's feeling very fluish. She's had missing time, clearly, but had to go to work. Goes to work, still feeling unwell, and turns on her computer, and it goes zap, right offline. And she's like, oh, no. She calls the IT guy, like, my computer, could you put it online, And he's like, sure, get away from your desk, I'll do it. And so she's keeping busy and goes to the copier, zap.
Oh, my goodness.
Offline.
Yeah.
And she's telling me all this because she thinks it's related. And I'm like, gosh, here we go again. Because I keep hearing this same exact thing from people. She calls the IT guy, like, as soon as you're done, I broke the copier. He's like, what? And she goes to the fax machine. And
no way.
That. So that's when we know, like, this is not a coincidence.
Right.
I mean, I talked to a guy who was a welder at a car factory. Same exact thing. He kept breaking this very expensive welding machine to where the company doctors demanded he go in for an examination to find out what the heck is wrong with him. He's like, it's not me. He's like, I'm not doing this. He said he went through, had a light bulb budget that was off the charts, because he'd turn on the light bulb. Contactees can't wear watches often because they just break.
Yeah.
One lady, she's a contactee. She's like walking down the street, and she looks up at the street light, and she got this weird feeling. It's like, it's gonna buzz out. It's gonna go off. And not only did it go off, the whole street went out.
Yeah, I've heard of that happening.
She pointed to her boyfriend, and she's like, watch that light. It's gonna go out. And it did. Freaked him out.
Yeah.
And I just figured it out. I was talking to this other lady who had contact. She came back, and she's like, books started flying off the shelves. Lights were going on and off. The door flung open.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening here? This is my assessment. Is that when you have contact, you are moving into, they travel interdimensionally, right? It's almost like going to the fourth dimension there. When they pick you up,
sure,
pick you back, you're speaking with them telepathically. They're levitating you.
Yeah.
This isn't necessarily technology doing this. They're moving through walls, not with necessarily a technology. Psychic ability.
Right.
The ET's technology is psychically connected. It's operated psychically. It's one and the same. It's a technology that is also alive, psychic. It's so advanced. We don't even begin to understand it. So someone has this experience, they're psychically activated. They're switched on. So they come back and their bioelectric field is in full force.
Yeah.
And we know this from, because the poltergeist phenomenon has been studied extensively. And if you look into it, there's a huge connection to people who, particularly emotionally disturbed, adolescents who are going through puberty and all this stuff that's going on. It's connected to anger. Psychokinesis, we know, is connected to anger.
Yeah, like the movie Carrie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's going on here, this is my assessment, is that our bioelectric field, these psychic abilities, which are related to mediumship and out-of-body experiences and clairvoyance and healing, even healing, all have to do with your bioelectric field, your aura, your etheric astral bodies, which, because we've talked about out-of-body experiences.
Yes.
When you're on the other side, you can levitate. You can do psychokinesis.
Yeah.
Communication is telepathic, all of it. But when you're here in the physical dimension, we're kind of separated and compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Contact breaks those barriers down. You are absolutely accessing these abilities that we call supernatural.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree with you more. Like I completely think and believe that I experienced that after my husband passed away 3 years ago. Everything I came in contact with started breaking. And at first I didn't make the connection, but then when this went on month after month after month, my microwave, anything electric like that, my garage door opener, my refrigerator, my stove, anything electric that I came in contact with started failing. And then I had a grief counselor at the time, and I actually spoke to him about this. And I really believe that my kinetic energy was broken because of the loss of my husband, and that I was like manifesting this around me. And the funny thing is, the moment I realized it, it stopped. Like once I started having this realization that stuff was breaking because maybe I was responsible, then I started breaking. I broke my hand. I broke my rib.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it was weird. So I said, this has to stop. This just, but yeah, so I think I kind of manifested that myself.
Yeah. These kind of events when someone has a near-death experience, same sort of thing starts happening.
Yeah.
People will have astral projection experiences. That happened to me. As soon as I got involved in UFOs, I'm starting to have out-of-body experiences. I didn't realize it, but I was probably...
Yours were... we had like a 2-hour talk on them. Yeah. I'm going to put the link. People, you have to go and watch it. It's amazing. Are you still having, of course you're still having them, right? Your OB. Yeah. And you control them pretty good, right? Like you can kind of control.
For the most part.
For the most part, right? I mean, didn't you see your mom and you like put that out there before you went to sleep? Your mom had passed and you wanted to, so you kind of had that happen. So let's talk about that for a second. You visited these planes where these entities live. Was that your mother's spirit? Was it her energy? What do you think you were experiencing when you saw your mom, when you were having an OBE?
Yeah, well, here's the way I look at it. We talk about astral projection and leaving our body and going to the other side. But I think it's kind of the wrong way to look at it in a way, because the fact is we're coming down here on Earth, incarnating into a physical body for essentially a brief period of time. Mm-hmm. Feels like forever when we're down here. But the fact is, that's our true home.
Right.
That's where we live. That's who we are. We are not the physical body. We're not even our astral body. we're our consciousness. And we go all the way right up to the very source, the center, what you might call all that is God. I like what the Native Americans call it, the spirit which moves through all things.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it.
It is.
But yeah, we are, I think each of us is an entity that's inviolate. We are eternal, immortal. We are always going to be us. We may wear different names and different bodies, different identities, and even to a certain extent personalities, but it's still us.
Right.
And we might have, compartmentalized our memories from life to life to life. But most people at some point along your pathway towards spiritual enlightenment, those walls start to break down. You start to exhibit these natural abilities, not supernatural. You start to have memories of past lives. And you start to realize, oh my gosh, identity isn't what we think it is. You start to really empathize with other people and realize the oneness of all of us and all humanity and animals and nature. So yeah, I visited my mom, and how awesome and wonderful. And I still do it. And I've lost a lot of loved ones over the years, and visited every single darn one of them. Wow. They're all there, and they're beautiful, and they're very happy some had a hard time with it, rising up to the higher dimensions, because we all have to work through our issues, certainly. But absolutely, there is life after death. We can all go there. We are going there every night. It's absolutely connected to all of this. Like for me, my out-of-body experiences happened because my mother died. So it was in a way a near-death experience, but it wasn't my near-death experience. Right. It was just near death.
Yeah.
So someone might have a car accident or a head trauma or an emotional event. A simple UFO sighting can break down that barrier. And these are, like they call them, the contact modalities. That's a new term that people are latching onto.
Okay, Preston. So
these are contact modalities, is the way that people are putting it, which are basically different avenues towards wisdom or experience, enlightenment. So yeah, for someone it might be a near-death experience. For someone it might be a simple UFO sighting. For someone it might be an onboard encounter. For someone it might be a Bigfoot encounter. It doesn't really matter which door you open first. It opens up the other doors.
Right.
It could be a ghost encounter. I remember after my mom died, we had a service for her. This was in 1984. That was kind of really my opening door. It wasn't necessarily finding out my brother had seen a UFO. There was a couple of years earlier, my mom had passed on.
Yeah.
I saw her spirit. Darned if I did not see her ghost at the service, sitting right next to my dad, full color, in the car. He's driving up, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm hallucinating.
Yeah.
And I've never taken hallucinogenics. Drugs scare me.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at her thinking, oh my gosh, because she has this certain way of sitting. She always emphasized the importance of posture. And she was the epitome of elegance and beauty. She was a really beautiful woman, but always had great posture. And there she was, sitting fully, straight up in the way she does, and didn't look at me. Did not look at me.
Wow.
But I'm like, oh my gosh, I am hallucinating. I am so lost with grief. And I was really just torn up because I didn't believe in life after death.
Right.
To have someone you love so deeply just ripped out of you is so traumatic. But so I didn't think ghost. I did not think ghost at all.
So you just thought you were hallucinating and because of your grief.
Yeah. Of course.
Was that the only time you saw her spirit?
Yeah. Visually.
Yeah. I know you have in your out-of-body experiences, but
yeah, I mean, it started ramping up from there because I started having lucid dreams about her. We talked about this, and that escalated towards full-on out-of-body experiences. I don't know if I told you this. This was so cool. One time, I moved out of the house where I grew up when I was like 25 years old. Not long after, actually, it was, 6 years after she died. Now that I think of it. So fairly long after, but this is something that took me years to get over. And I cried for a year. I loved her so much. But I was sitting in my condominium complex in Canoga Park. I had a third story, little 600 square foot room that I moved into. I loved that place. And I was playing the guitar because I'm learning to play guitar and I love it. And suddenly my answering machine, remember those little answering machines we used to have? Went beep for like 10 seconds, 15. It can't do that. I'm like, what? And that shocked me. And I just had this feeling that somebody was there. Because I was playing the guitar crying, because I'm like, oh, mom, I miss you, mom.
Right.
And I'm playing these songs to, try just work through the emotion. And the answering machine goes off. So I put the guitar down and I'm getting this feeling so I stood up and I looked and I'm like, is there anybody here? And you know what happened? Oh, I still get chills. The dining room light went, it was on, it went off and then on. It didn't flicker. It went off and then on. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, okay, I think there's someone here. Mom, is this you? And, like nothing. I'm like, Mom, I think you're here. Nothing. So I'm like, okay, well, Mom, if this is you, this was so unfair of me. I'm like, if this is really you, those statues I have on my toilet? I still have them. There's little brass statues of a fly and a turtle. They're heavy, they're little things, but they're heavy metal brass statues.
Yeah.
3 of them. And I'm like, if this is really you, why don't you move those around? Because I had them situated, all lined up in a row on the top of my toilet. and then I just continued playing guitar and I forgot about it until the next day. I'm sitting there watching TV and I heard this crash. I'm like, what the heck was that? And I go running into my bedroom, nothing. Into the kitchen. I'm like, the sound was weird in that condo. It was a U-shaped condo and sound would trick you. So I'm like, gosh, I know I heard something crash in this house. And I couldn't find it. So finally I had to go to the bathroom. And I walked in there and I lost my mind because there on the floor were those 3 statues.
No way.
I regret not taking a picture of it. I should have. But I was so shocked. I immediately went, oh my God. And I knew it was her. I mean, I asked her to do it and she did it. So stupid me, still kind of playing the scientist, being objective. I quickly picked them up and put them back on the toilet. And I'm like, okay. And I shook that thing. You can't shake a toilet. You can try. I tried. I did everything I could. I stomped the floor. I banged on the walls. I tried to get glue on them. They, of course, didn't budge.
Yeah.
But that was her. I know it was her. You will never sway me from that. It was the coolest thing. And it was so unfair of me to ask her to do that. But somehow she was able to do it or got assistance. I don't know. But yeah, that was so amazing to me. I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm cooked. I know.
Maybe she was happy to do that for you. I mean,
I think so because we, 5 kids in the family, we were all devastated, but I went the extra mile for some reason. I don't want to say I was sadder than anyone else in the family because I wasn't, but something different happened to me. I became kind of the black sheep. I'm like, guys, I'm having out-of-body experiences. And they're all looking at me like I'm crazy. Like, no, I'm meeting Mom. They're like, now you're talking about UFOs. Now you're talking about this.
Right.
My dad's like, I should have taken you to church. I'm like, Dad, this has nothing to do with that. My parents rebelled against religion when they took all the older kids to church, but they never took me. So my dad jumped to that, and I'm like, no, Dad, I'm fine. I actually do believe in God. It was funny.
Have you ever, which I know we've talked a little bit about it, but let's talk about some of the less angelic forces, like some of the demonic stuff that's out there. And I know you said during one of your OBEs, you think one of them might have pulled at your ankle when you were kind of drifting out there. But aside from that, have you ever encountered anything like that, which I'm sure you have? Let's talk about some of that, because some people, especially people that I interview that are mediums, and they don't like talking about it because they think if you talk about it, you invoke it, you can like bring it into your world. But I think good and evil both exist, and I think that as a human race, we struggle with it, every day. Someone just told me that we have two demonics on one side and two angelics on the other, and they're constantly like in our ear battling. So I tend to believe that. Like, what are your experiences with such things?
Yeah. Well, I've certainly interviewed people who are very reluctant to talk about their experiences because they said exactly that. Like, I talk about this and stuff starts to happen again.
Exactly.
And I researched multiple personalities because there's this connect. People were like, these people have multiple personalities. I got every book on it. It's really interesting because often they'll have all these personalities. One's really angelic, super psychic,
Right.
just good and has access to the source. The other is a demonic monster.
Yeah.
And they'll actually call it these horrible names. So there's that element to our own personality, definitely. Right. So that absolutely does make sense to me to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had my own experiences with some of this, and certainly interviewed some people. There's one experience I want to tell you of these people I interviewed. I'll start with my own.
Yeah.
But don't let me forget to tell you about these ladies who lived in a haunted apartment. Oh my gosh. Because for me, I did have that OBE where I'm flying along and something grabs my ankle, and it wasn't human. It had 4 fingers, and it didn't feel evil to me. It felt like I don't even know how to put it, like a lower level spirit.
Mm.
But I reached down and I'm like, gosh, these are long, icky sucker fingers, and I peeled it off. And, it took some force to do too. Felt physical. When you're out of body and you're meeting other interdimensional beings, you can touch them. They feel physical to you. It's very interesting. It's different, but it definitely feels like there's something there. I pulled it off and off I went. And I've had a few what were kind of scary or unpleasant experiences. One time I'm like out of body and I'm wandering around my house. I may have mentioned this, but at any rate, I'm like, let's go outside. And I walked through the front door, through it, right? Because you can do that and it's so cool. And I'm sitting on my little doorstep. This is downtown Reseda. This is heavily, houses on every side. And walking down the street are 3 young men. And I instantly recognize these as spirits, and not good ones, earthbound spirits. You're very telepathic and empathetic when you're out of body because all these layers, all these walls are lifted up. You're raw with perception and impressions. And I knew who these guys were. Earthbound spirits, thugs, murderers, thieves. No good would come of meeting with these folks. And I've got all the books on out-of-body experiences, and they say, just send love to them. I'm like, these guys saw me, we locked gazes, and they were skilled at movement. They zoomed towards me.
Ooh.
And I'm like, because I was not going to deal with them. I'm not sending these guys love. Are you kidding me? I am leaving. Scared the living daylights out of me. That was my first real encounter with bad spirits. So I just dove right back into my body, and I was done. But later, I would have more experiences like that. Probably the craziest one was I'm slowly coming to awareness that I'm out of body, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm in this I'd been exploring the hellish realms.
Oh, why? Why would you do that?
I was curious, is there a hell? And to a sense, there is. It's not for me, my experience, it's not the lakes of fire, classic Christian hell, but there are lower realms where people are not aware that they're dead. This is just above the earth realm where there's no light. On the astral planes, there's not a shadow in sight. Everything sparkles. It's made of light. The flowers, the trees, it is gorgeous. But you go down a level, it's very much an urban setting, and there's shadows and darkness, and people are confused, and you can go lower and lower to where it's just darkness. And there are people there who are crying. There are people there who are hungry. There are people there who are on drugs, people there who are angry. You can't get them to look at you or pay attention to you. They're very self-absorbed. But at any rate, I'm coming to awareness. I'm in this room, and there's these guys looking at me who I don't trust them because they're flattering me up and down. And flattery, I don't like it because it feels like, I mean, it's nice to pay someone a compliment, but if someone's overly, like, oh, you're so great, like, I give them the side eye, like, what do you want from me? And so they were doing that, and I'm starting to come into full awareness that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm out of body. I am absolutely out of body. And I'm looking around, I'm like, this is a dark, dark place. And then I looked at them and I stood up. I'm like, who are you? And I confronted them. I'm like, why are you telling me this? And darned, these guys turned their appearance into classic demons. Horns, pig noses, fangs, reddish. I mean, it was horrifying. And I immediately, at this point, I gotten pretty good at this out of body stuff. And had learned how to, basically shield. So I, basically put a shield of love and light around me. And if you just stay really centered and focused, you're going to be fine. You can go anywhere. And that's what I did. And I stood my ground and I said, I have nothing to offer. I didn't say this, I thought it. I'm like, I am love. And I pushed love towards them. Because I'm thinking, well, maybe I can help them. Because these are actually people. I am not convinced that these are necessarily not people. These are people who've chosen evil. I'm not fully sure here because under the classic religious explanation, demons are non-human spirits,
right?
Entities. But if you look at the demonologists like Ed and Lorraine Warren, they're talking about people who've chosen this path.
Exactly.
From a demonic spirit. So I don't know. But they were humanoids. I'll put it that way. But yeah, and snarling and angry. And the more I pushed love at them, the angrier they got. And they were attacking and bouncing off against my shields. And I'm like, I don't know. And so I tried again. I tried 3 times because I'll give anyone 3 chances. And that's
it. Yeah.
You had your opportunity. And they were so angry at me. And it was just inflaming them. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing them any good whatsoever. So I left. That was pretty scary. And I've had a few things like that.
Was that the only time you went to that realm, that hellish realm, or did you go back? No, because I've been in all kinds of these lower realms. My friend died of alcoholism, and he was way down at the bottom in just pure darkness. Yeah, that was sad.
And I had some trouble with my oldest brother. And actually, right after that experience, I ran into him. I started going up a few levels, and he was still down there, earthbound. Thankfully, I recently ran into him, and he's still earthbound, but he was okay. I'm like, Jamie, I love you. And I held his hands. I'm like, I just want you to know, you're good with me, and I'm good with you. So you don't have to worry about that. All is forgiven. I love you. So he's good.
Good.
Different people have different levels.
Lead through to us. Is that what we experience, like when you go to like a haunted location, which you have to tell us about those women that you were talking about in the haunted apartment? Do they bleed through? Is that what we're experiencing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just last night I was talking to a lady who became suicidal. It turned out that she had lived in a room where a person had committed suicide suicide in a very unusual way. And she didn't know this. And she's thinking of like, this is the way I'm going to off myself. And this, she didn't get into the details, but it was unusual. And when she found that out, she's like, oh my God, this isn't even me. I talked to another guy whose son was suicidal. Turned out he was living in an apartment where the teenager had committed suicide. He had a spirit attachment. It absolutely can influence you. And when you walk into a haunted location, you're like, ugh. Yeah,
you feel it.
Anyone can like, ooh, I'm getting the chills, or it feels spooky. It's yucky in here.
Experience that.
It's dark.
Yeah, it's awful.
So people, even those who are absolutely psychically blind think they are, aren't. They're absolutely not. They're like, I don't like it here. Let's go. And because we do sense these things, even if it's unconscious, because there's a part of you who's 100% aware of all of this stuff going on.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
different levels.
I want to hear about those women that lived in the apartment. But before we get to that, I just want to let folks know that you're tuning in to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled with our guest, Preston Dennett. And we are on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 and 107.7 FM in beautiful New Orleans. And thank you all so much for supporting us. Okay, tell us that juicy story.
Yeah, I started doing a lot of ghost research because I wanted to know if ghosts were real. And of course they are. I only had to look at a few books to realize, I'm like, well, this goes back thousands of years. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming. Multiple witness encounters. There's no doubt ghosts are real. Those who are skeptical, like, where's the proof? Do your research. You are out of your minds if you don't think ghosts are real. You have not done your homework. And so I started asking everyone, I learned how to, like I said, do interviews. Anything strange happened to you? And I get the whole shebang of UFOs and near death, and levitation even came up. And my sister-in-law, her sister was friends with these two ladies who had moved into an apartment building. They were actresses and didn't have a whole lot of money and decided to rent this apartment in downtown Van Nuys, California. Not a great neighborhood. Like, wow, we found this apartment. It's so cheap. Wonder why it's so cheap. Who cares? So they found out it was a retirement building, and ambulances were arriving every week to cart someone off who had passed away, and the apartment was real dark. So they cleaned it up and they tried their best to make it, livable, but they never really liked it. And their first complaint was that the guy next door was banging on the wall at night over and over again. Knock, 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 knock. Finally, they complained to the management. And she said, oh, he thought it was you. He moved out last week.
Oh.
And it was still going on. And so things are ramping up, right? They're feeling cold spots. They're seeing little black apparitions out of the side of their eyes. They'd hear crashing noises in the kitchen, go running in, nothing moved. The bike would move around by itself. All this stuff is going on. This is right after they moved in, right? Once they turned on the faucet, this is so weird because I had another person tell me this exact thing. I've heard every ghostly manifestation you can think of, right? And it's usually doors opening and closing, lights going on off, and footsteps and cold spots and odors. They said, we turned on the faucet and the water came out sideways.
Oh, God.
And because I'm like, oh my gosh, because someone else had told me that. Just like someone's putting their hand up against it. So weird. Light bulbs exploding, all kinds of stuff. So they invite their neighbor or their friend over to set up their stereo because they're not tech savvy, right? And he can set up stereos. And so he's setting up the stereo, and all of a sudden he's like shaking and scary and pale and rushing through it and looking at the corner of the room. And they're like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he's like, nothing. And he quickly sets it up. He's like, I'm going now. I'm like, wait, aren't you going to stay and have dinner? We made dinner. He's like, no, I'm leaving. Bye. And off he goes. And so they call him up. They're like, what the heck is wrong with you? We made dinner. Don't you like us? What's going on? He's like, no, you're fine. I don't like your apartment. They're like, why? He says, it's haunted. They're like, what do you mean it's haunted? Because they're like, oh my God, we did. But they don't tell people that, they'll invite him over and they don't want to tell him. He's like, well, I saw lemurs. And they're like, what's lemurs? He's like, I see them when there's ghosts around. And he described these little lemur-looking creatures that he can see astrally, which is interesting because that does turn up in haunting cases.
Like a lemur cat you're talking about?
Like a lemur, like a rodent type thing, but an astral creature with big eyes. He described it.
Oh,
and a pale
okay.
body. This is just how he described it, right?
Yeah.
So they're having all this stuff going on. Meanwhile, one of them is having horrific precognitive dreams. This is another thing that happens if you live in a demonic haunting. She would dream of a murder, on the news the next day. Dream of
Oh,
a plane crash, on the news the next day. Horrific stuff. And so she's like, not a happy camper. They invited their sister over and didn't tell them, of course. And she wakes up screaming in the middle of the night and says, I'm leaving now. They're like, what happened? Something grabbed me and tried to choke me.
oh gosh.
So they're freaking out. They're
Yeah.
like, we have to get out of here. But they don't have, they have a lease. They've got nowhere to go. But events came to a climax when they went out. How did this happen? They went out to eat at Cafe 50s, and the table starts shaking in public. And they complained to the management, and he's looking at them like, what's wrong with you? And they're like, well, we're leaving. They're getting up to go, and they're paying the bill. The gumball machine right behind them starts going ching, 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 ching. And the guy at the counter goes completely pale. And so they run. They're like, we have to, it's following us now. They go to bed that night, and they start seeing black spirits running back and forth across the hallway. They had seen this many times, but now one stops, looks at them, comes rushing at them. They have one big giant king bed, right? They sleep on, and it dives into one of the girls and possesses her. This is going to the full end stage. Demonic hauntings follow a very set pattern, and this went right to the end. And she's paralyzed. She's on the bed. She's pressed down into it. Her friend sees her crushed into the mattress, can't not pick her up. Tries to move her, can't move her. She's a light little thing. So this is crazy. And meanwhile, she can't breathe. Her chest is hurting. And she can see this spirit, which has got dirty teeth and missing teeth and black eyes and stringy hair. And it's just not okay. And finally, she called on Jesus. And all just the power of good and love, and finally lifted. And they're like, we're moving out tonight. Because they had tried, they had called all their friends, put up sacred statues. That didn't work. Salted the whole apartment, got gallons of salt, and that didn't work. Complained to the management and said, oh yeah, we have a haunting problem in this building. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I called her up. She's like, yeah, I saw an apparition. She described all these people. Talked to the neighbor. Their neighbor had a haunting problem right across the door from them. So this was not just them. I verified. I went down there.
How long ago was this? Did this happen?
1996, I think it was.
Okay. Because I think now there's a disclosure law where, they have to tell you if it's haunted or ghosty or whatever. Yeah.
I interviewed a lady who was a real estate agent who had the job to sell Charles Manson's former residence. She said it wasn't easy. The psychic came in and she's like, ooh, something terrible happened here. She totally could sense it.
Absolutely.
Talked to another, it turned out by weird coincidence, I was able to interview several people who were involved with hauntings that were caused by this one man. Oh man, that's another story. But let me end this one because it's just about over.
Yeah, no, go right ahead.
They're like, we're moving out. That's it. Don't care. We'll live on someone's couch. And they did. And they found an apartment, and weird little stuff happened. But it basically ended because they refused to talk about it. They wouldn't. And they were very reluctant to talk to me because they were afraid it would trigger it again. But they said about 2 weeks after they moved, they were in their apartment, their new apartment, when suddenly they woke up because the apartment was shaking, not an earthquake. It was a loud buzzing noise. So they're like, oh no, here we go again. And they're walking through the house trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Go out onto the balcony. And that's where the source of the buzzing is. And it's a UFO. It's a darn UFO right over the apartment building, covered with lights, V-shaped, and looking at them. And they had this telepathic connection. This was another one that freaks me out. And to this day, I don't fully understand it. Because this would be fodder for people saying, well, UFOs are demonic. I'm like, well, I'm not so sure they are. But I think that their haunting did this. it opened that doorway of awareness, and
Oh, I
you know what I
see.
mean? So they became sort of psychically aware. And ETs would love people who are psychically aware, or maybe they were drawn to it in some way. I don't know. This is a weird one. But there's a connect. They absolutely swear up and down, this is connected somehow. You explain it to me. But I know that for some reason, this is connected to our haunting. So that's that story. And a final end note is I heard back from one of them. Well, she didn't heard back from the friend because they ended up going their own separate ways. She was attacked again by this demonic spirit who threw her across the room and pinned her to the ground for an hour. She could not get up.
Oh, and this is after they moved out and.
Yep.
Oh, no. Did you ever write about that in any of your books?
Yeah, I wrote about that in my book, California Ghosts. Yep. Not the only demonic haunting I wrote about, because there are different types of hauntings. There's 3 main types of hauntings, 4 even. But one is what we would call a residual haunting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an active spirit. It's the events imprinted onto a location because they're so emotional and so traumatic that even a person who's not psychic can see it. And you can tell this is because the ghost is not aware of you. It's often a replay of a single event. You might see
What do
someone
they call that?
them.
The stone tape theory thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that, right?
Right.
Stone tape theory. Okay, go ahead.
I usually hear it called residual haunting, but I've heard that term.
Residual, right, stone tape. Yep.
And another would be your classic ghost, which is an earthbound spirit, often who does not recognize that they're dead, but sometimes does, and is earthbound because of lust, greed, addiction, evil thoughts in some way.
Right.
One of those deadly sins. Well, there's a reason they're called deadly sins.
Yeah.
You really are. Work through your issues and you'll be fine. But that is a ghost, as opposed to a spirit, which is essentially the same thing. But people have spirit visitations from loved ones.
Right.
Fine. That's not a haunting. This is a great, wonderful experience that people almost always have if they lose a loved one. 80%, I think, is the people will have some sign, whether it's a butterfly or a rainbow or a feeling or an apparition. So yeah, that's 3, I guess, huh? So, the poltergeist, and that's the 4th, which is poorly understood. And there are some researchers that's not even a ghost. That's you. This is uncontrolled physical mediumship. This is your bioelectric field wreaking havoc because you can't control it. It's not a spirit. It's got nothing to do with spirits. It's you. And there's a lot of debate about that because some of that is probably not you. Some of these are what we would call demonic spirit, which might not even be human. Might not even be, the type of entity we think it is. It could be splintered off of your own personality that you have denied. So all your evil, all the suppressions are breaking out around you. But it is still essentially you. Or it could be, I'm of the school of thought that it's a separate spirit.
I mean, that's why the Catholic Church has exorcists still. I mean, they still perform exorcisms, right?
Yeah, and effectively too.
Right.
That does work.
Yeah.
Not always.
No, and sometimes several times they have to do it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that's really difficult to parse out and separate and understand. And I can get why some researchers are like, this all feels like it's so closely related. Maybe it's the same thing. I don't think so. I think that's a mistake. And until we know, we don't know.
Yeah.
But having, gone out of body and seen this kind of stuff from another perspective, I can tell you that these are real entities and they're not ET. This is my assessment. Bigfoot is real. Ghosts are real. We have the ability to levitate. That was another whole subject I looked into because I had a family friend who levitated spontaneously as a child. And so I asked everybody and they all looked at me like I was nuts until I found another person, a friend of my sister-in-law. It's like, oh yeah, I levitated as a child. I've since talked to about 20 people, 10 or 20, who've had this experience. But wrote a book on it, and it is 100% verified in a scientific laboratory at least 4 or 5 times, unequivocally, scientifically proven, but absolutely anecdotally proven as well, with hundreds of people. Like St. Joseph of Cupertino, my favorite levitator of all times, was the flying friar of Europe, and crowds followed him everywhere. There were some 300 people who testified for his canonization who saw him levitating. Full on. He had superhuman strength and immunity to fire.
Wow.
But there was a very famous medium, Daniel Douglas Home, who probably would have been canonized if he had been born a little earlier, but who was very well known for, he toured the United States and Europe, ended up meeting with all kinds of heads of state and people who were, at the top of their field in every sort of category there, who did physical mediumship and physically levitated. And people don't know his whole story because he also displayed superhuman strength on a few occasions. He lifted up this giant log and threw it across the way there and showed immunity to fire as well. And if you look into the lives of the saints, thaumaturges, people who were, quote, magic users in the Middle Ages, they could call animals to them.
Yeah.
They could walk on water. I've got modern day accounts of people walking on water, levitating, turning invisible, teleporting. Healing abilities are so cool.
Oh, yeah.
That was another thing I experienced personally from contactees who could actually push energy through me, and you could feel it. I was healed once, and it was very effective. I was having a problem with my feet, but once, here real quick, if I may.
Of course.
I was at a family party. We had dinners every weekend. It was wonderful to come from a big family. We were all very close. We loved each other deeply. I miss that because we've all kind of gone our own separate ways. But we'd have dinner every Sunday night or Saturday night. Yeah, Saturday. And there'd be, 20 of us because we all have friends, right? And it was a big potluck thing, and we'd just talk afterwards and do our thing. And my dad's like, did you know that your hands emit an electric field that you can measure on a battery? I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, here's a battery detector, and it has 2 separate leads. Go ahead, and I'll show you. And he held it, and I looked, and the little dial went up. I'm like, oh my God, look at that. Your hands generate electricity.
Yeah.
So I started going from each person, and each person measured. They'd make the dial go up just a few clicks, right? And I'm going down the line, and I finally get to my sister, Victoria. We're a year and 4 days apart. We're practically twins. And I measure her hands, and it goes zoink, almost twice as much as everyone else. Not quite. I'm like, wow, Victoria, you've got really electric hands. Let me try that again. And zoink, I love this because this was scientific.
Yeah.
Related to hands-on healing. I'm like, do me. And so everyone's, crowding around because this is interesting, right? And I hold the leads, and this darn thing goes quite a bit higher. And my brother Steven's looking at me. He's like, well, your hands are wet. They must be sweaty. I'm like, well, maybe you're right. So I wash my hands, and I dry them thoroughly, and I go back, and nope, zoink. My hands are twice as energetic.
Wow.
And I had been called on to do healings out of body a few times. So I think, because when you do this out of body stuff, it's the same avenue that I keep talking about. It's one way to open the door to these abilities that we all have and we can all do. And it was so cool because I'm like, wow, this is science. You can't dispute this. Look at this.
Right.
I haven't measured it since, but that would be a cool scientific experiment.
Yeah, that would be. Absolutely. So what happened with your feet? You had a healing done by somebody?
Yeah, I was just having some kind of arthritis foot problems, and went away. Turned out that, I have lots of friends.
Reiki is all about hand healing, so energy
Yeah, I've got so many cases of people who have contact and then say, well, I now have the ability to heal, and this is what I do.
Wow.
I do healing ability. Barbara Lamb talks about this. I love her as a researcher. She's got several cases of that. Dolly talks about this. Yeah. Michael Carter, he's in the UFO field. He's had contact. He's a healer. He works doing healings.
Well, it's so simple. If you just take a breath and put your two hands together, you could feel the almost like polarization of energy,
yep.
like in your own palms. You could feel it in yourself.
Yeah, there was a reality TV show where this guy was a healer, and he was so effective, and it was off in one season. I was so mad. I feel like it was suppressed because it was so good. He would go up to people and they'd be, oh my God, I can feel what is that? And he's like, that's my aura. Just let me work. He had this one lady he was working. This is how he discovered the ability. This lady had I forget the name for it. When your finger, you can't bend it. It gets locked into position. He's like, let me try something. He just had the urge, and he put his hands over her finger, and she started crying. And he's like, oh, I'll stop. And she's like, don't you dare. Keep doing it. Because she could feel it. And her finger straightened out, and her problem disappeared. And that's how he found out he had healing abilities. It was a great show. I wish I could remember it. I know what the guy looks like. Young guy, brown hair. He was
so familiar to me. I know that there was a show about some man going around healing people. It wasn't long lived, right?
No, it was one season, and such a good show. There was another show where they did psychic. They'd bring in 5 psychics and run them through the mill of these tests. It was so good. They hid a person in a location of like 5 acres. This one kid's like, and he goes running off right directly to the girl. It was so amazing. Or they put, little boxes, like, outhouses kind of type things. Deals, and there was 100 of them. They'd walk up and down. I think they're in there. They were. These were really good psychics. Some of them didn't work because, like, you put money in a box. If you don't have an emotional attachment to it, it's really hard to detect. Right. So, it's not a perfect thing. People are always like, well, if you're psychic, you should know this and then and you should know everything. No. It doesn't quite work like that. But it was another really good show, lasted 1 season. And I'm like, why does this keep getting suppressed?
It's so frustrating.
I want to see more of these shows. I'm so interested in this stuff because
absolutely.
We all have these abilities, all of us.
What do you think about the connection of I always call it the pineal gland. Is that the right way to say it? Pineal, whatever. That the fluoride in our water has calcified this gland, and that's responsible for all of our intuitive abilities. Do you think that, no pun intended, holds water, that theory?
I do. I can't say that I've done a deep scientific study of it myself, but just reading the literature on this, there does seem to be absolutely a connection there. The pineal gland has been connected to all of this. And there's sort of an organic element to your ability to do these things. We used to think, scientifically, people are still thinking, well, our memories are stored in the brain because we have it all mapped out. No, because they found this guy who is missing most of his brain and he's still functioning just fine.
Isn't that crazy?
And they're like, this is impossible. This guy should not be walking and talking. What is going on here? That's because consciousness does not reside in the brain. The brain is more of an antenna or a tool it's the hardware. It's not the software. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our spirit's really the software.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so have you kind of dabbled in any further research with like the ghostly realm? Any high strangeness? Like what was your last thing that you did that was profound that left you like, I can't believe I just saw that or witnessed that? Like, how long ago was that? Have you been to a haunted location? That kind of thing.
Gosh, in terms of the most recent stuff, it's largely been my own OBEs.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of ghostly stuff. And I've seen Dolly do a few what you would call a telekinesis type stuff.
Oh, wow.
Where something would crash. And she's like, I'm right here. You see that, right? I'm like, yeah, I see that. But in terms of, I mean, here's one. It was some time ago, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I often think of it because this lady that my sister-in-law was working with was a medium, a physical medium. Those are pretty rare.
Oh, yeah.
Read spirits, but some people do what's called physical mediumship, and she did what's called table tipping, which is kind of like a Ouija board, except you use this little table and it goes up, or it does things, right? Yeah. This is actually a very common pastime throughout Europe, 100 years ago and further back. They would do that instead of TV. This is what they did.
Yeah.
And we've got all these sort of warnings against the Ouija board, which is a piece of wood. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the way people use it, and they're not understanding that you are actually inviting spirits in, and you have to be careful. And if you're not experienced, I wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
But she was an experienced medium. And I'm like, this is so interesting because I'm so interested in this stuff. I'm like, I want to go and see them. She's like, oh yeah, she does sessions once a month. You can come. So I was invited, and there was a group of 10 or 20 people there, and there was 4 of them sitting around a table, not me. And I watched them talking to the spirits in this table going up on its side, and it was a light table. And at me as a skeptic, I'm more skeptical now because I just can't wrap my head around things. I'm like, because I was lied to for so long by our governments, and people that I loved and trusted weren't telling me stuff that I would have liked to have known.
Right.
So I'm like looking at them. I'm like, I don't know. Couldn't wait for my turn. And so it was my turn. And Christy was sitting next to me, my sister-in-law, and Donna, the medium, and another person. And I knew instantly it was real because that table shook and then went up. And it was different for each spirit. Right? And so I'm like, I'm here as a researcher. Would you mind if just me and Donna did it? And so Christy and the other are like, sure, So I'm like, okay, just me and Donna have our fingers on the table. I'm like, and she had this whole ritual, like, table up. She'd say, our spirits show you. I forget what it was, but sort of a command. Table went right up, and it wasn't towards her, so she couldn't press down. It was on the side or the other side, or sometimes towards me and sometimes towards her. So I'm like, okay. Of course, I examined the table.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
And strings and all that. And I brought compasses, and I had all what I could get. So I'm like, okay, Donna, can you do it with one hand? She's like, I'll try. And she put one hand on the table, and I'm just barely touching this table with as light as I possibly can with my fingers. Mm-hmm. Went right up. I'm like, okay, Donna, one finger. Can you do it with one finger? And she's like, I don't know. I've never tried. Put one finger on it. Went right up. I'm like, oh my God. Okay. I'm like, let me just try it. Not you. You just sit there. My hands alone. And that table couldn't go up, but it shook like mad. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And we tried to get it to levitate. And it was so funny because what it did is it walked across the room and bent over this downward facing staircase at a 50, what do you call that? A horizontal angle.
Did you take video of that?
I did. Yeah. And I sent it to the TV show Sightings, and they never sent it back.
What?
Yeah, they took it. And they didn't air it either. I was so mad because I was a consultant for them and I was sending them all kinds of stuff.
What was it, on VHS or something? Like how it so that VHS. Was the copy. That was the only copy that you had.
Yep.
And they never sent it back.
No.
Oh, how awful.
Yeah, and I should have, gotten a contract or some, but I was so thrilled to just be a consultant for them, and I was sending them because I would record everything on TV, and they're like, "You didn't happen to record this news segment?" I'm like, "Of course I did. I always record everything and anything. I still have some of them, but no, they took it. I do have photographs not of that particular incident, but of us on the table and it doing stuff. I think I have some audio tapes of it as well.
Does she still do that type of
No,
work?
she stopped because
Oh.
she had a poltergeist outbreak that scared the living daylights out of her.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, she said she was at the pool at her, she lived in a condo and this weird clicking noise started going around her. It scared her. And then she had a fire break out in her kitchen.
Oh, that's no good.
And there was one other thing. And I will say after one, because I went back, we did this a number of times, driving home one day back into Topanga Canyon, and something hit my car so hard that it pushed it off the road.
What?
Yes. And I'm swerving, and I'm like, I regained control of my car. It scared the living daylights out of me. And I told people about this. My brother's like, well, you just hit an invisible oil slick. They're not visible. Like, no. I've done that. You've ever driven along and suddenly you're sliding.
Oh, yeah.
Nope, something hit the car with a force. And I connect it to that because I had just come from there.
Oh, yeah. Was it dented, your car, or nothing?
Nothing.
Oh, that would have freaked me right out.
Yeah, so we ended up not doing that anymore because you're playing around with stuff you don't fully understand. And I've talked to people who've used Ouija boards and regretted it.
Yeah.
Ended up, these girls who lived in Malibu were playing around with the Ouija board trying to contact the lady from Bewitched, Agnes Moorehead. They were obsessed with her as an actress. And they thought they contacted her, but then it started taking on different names. I'm like, who are you really? And it said, I am a demon.
Oh, great.
And so they're like, ah! And then this big black spirit appeared and their dog was barking at it. And
yeah, see, that's where you lose me. I don't want any part of that. Life is hard enough. We don't need to be inviting these entities to join in.
I've learned to differentiate something. When I'm interviewing people, I'm like, what did you see? I was like, well, I saw an apparition and it looked like this lady or this loved one or this. And other people say, well, it was a 8-foot tall, dark mass. That is the bad one.
Yeah.
That's the one you don't want to deal with.
Exactly.
I talked to a family who was having this problem with, a sister and a brother and a mother. And the mother wouldn't talk about it. She denied it. Often they'll pick on one person, right? The spirit. But the sister kept hearing the knockings on the roof and the wall. And people would come. My brother actually heard it. He was there once. And he's like, yeah, I heard it. I don't really want to talk about it. Because it was his girlfriend, right? And she's like, yeah, I just ignored it. Because I know if you give these things attention, they feed off of your fear. She's very psychic. She knows a lot. But her brother was interested and intrigued. And he would call it forth sometimes. They're like, look, wow, what are you? Who are you? And he stopped doing that after what happened. Because he was in the shower one day, taking a shower, which, is a vulnerable place to be. When it came, because it would always be on the roof. It came right down the shower walls. He went running out like, ah! He was in his bedroom one day, and he kept hearing footsteps coming up to the door. He'd run up, open the door. There'd be nothing there. It's freaking him out. It was toying with him because he had called it. He kept showing interest. He wasn't ignoring it like you're supposed to do. Don't give it attention. And then the footsteps came right up to the foot of his bed, and he saw this huge dark apparition. It went onto his bed. He watched it depress down, came over him, and pinned him to the mattress.
Oh, I hear so many stories like that.
Yeah, and so he's now losing his mind. This is so interesting because he's not a religious guy, but he called on Jesus, which didn't really work. He called on Buddha. He called on He called on every religious figure, and finally it lifted. So he's just basically calling to source. And it went away, and that was it. It ended. He repelled it. He would not. Anytime it went back, he ignored it. And so a couple of years later, I'm like, I don't suppose you had any problems with that spirit. Do you remember that? I interviewed. He's like, oh yeah, I remember that. I'm like, yeah, that was crazy how you saw that black apparition. He's like, what black apparition? I'm like, you described it to me. I've got it on record. You described a black. He's like, I don't remember that part.
What?
He had no memory of that attack. I've got him on, and I talked to another person, same darn thing. I interviewed her, and I asked her, I did a follow-up, because I always follow up, if I can. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you told me this. And she started getting really spooked. She's like, I don't remember. What are you talking? I'm like, I have you on tape. Do you want to hear it? She's like, no.
You think that's like an unconscious, like wipeout, where they just choose to forget it because it was too horrible for them? Like, what accounts for that, Preston?
It could be that. I am not entirely certain. I think it's more along the lines of how a dream slips away from you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You can have dreams are sort of an interdimensional experience. Dreams are so important. Pay attention. They're not nonsense. People,
Right.
You could follow your dreams. That's a pathway towards spiritual enlightenment. But they're very slippery, very hard to grasp onto. You can have a full-on beautiful dream. You get up and you're like, whoosh, it's gone.
Yeah. Why is that?
And this happens with missing time and UFO experiences. It's not the ETs trying to wipe your mind. It's you and your inability to break down those barriers. It's because we're so compartmentalized. We're so focused on the here now physical.
Yeah.
And really, we're supposed to have a deep psychic connection to the other side at all times. And if you work on meditation and consciousness and just building up your awareness and memory, you probably wouldn't have missing time encounters or forget something like this that happened to you. But yeah, trauma can do this as well. This is very well documented of someone having a car accident, having no memory of it.
Yeah.
Having, a war experience or child abuse, completely buried.
Absolutely.
So trauma is your mind will automatically compartmentalize it.
Yeah, well, I had that happen to me. So many weird things have happened to me since my husband passed, but I was unfortunately had to part with his belongings. And that was probably one of the most difficult things that I've ever done. Like, I would rather give birth to twins than have to do that. Like, it was just awful. And I blocked out so much of it because it was just so painful. Like the trauma, I guess I couldn't handle it. So I only have like fleeting moments of memory of doing that. And I'm fine with that. Like, I don't want to remember.
I understand it.
No.
There was another kid I interviewed, Whitney Wright, who had a haunting his whole life. It started out with an imaginary friend. He's like, Mom, it's not imaginary.
Yeah.
And he could command it around and do stuff. And he finally like, I'm not doing that, because it was a bad ghost, right?
Yeah.
And so he learned to just ignore it, but it would not leave him alone. His house was haunted. And I interviewed two of his friends who absolutely verified it because they had experiences. But one of them was his best friend and had a lot of experiences with it. And they had this, he made a mistake. He started playing with it. He's like, this is cool. Because the cold spot would follow them around the house. And so he walked into it. He would walk into this cold spot. He's like, this is trippy. This is better than drugs. I can feel it. Oh my God, try this. And Whitney's like, don't do this. Stop it. Because anytime anyone would taunt, like, you don't have a ghost, something would fly off the roof or something would slap someone across the head. Or, because, you don't provoke a ghost.
Yeah, test these things.
So Paul was his name, Paul Delgado. And he's playing around with this. And Whitney's like, just stop. And he's like, no, it's cool. It's cool. It's cool. And so finally this stopped and they talked and they went to bed. And Whitney's in his bed and Paul's sleeping on the floor in front of the bed. And he's like, Whitney, it's here in the room. And Whitney's like, yeah, I know. Don't play with it. And he's like, it's coming at me. It's coming at me. I can feel it.
Oh.
And all of a sudden he's like, it's on me. And he stiffened up and started like convulsing and speaking in tongues is how Whitney put it.
Oh,
so speaking this foreign language. So Whitney jumps up and tries to lift him up, can't lift him up. The guy reached out and clawed his face and chest. He bled, Whitney did, from this. And he's like, Paul, 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 Paul. And Paul was gone. Eyes were rolled up. Something else was in there, and it would speak in tongues. And finally, he's shaking him and calling his name. And finally, he faints and comes back to awareness, and he's weeping. He's shaking. And he's like, what happened? He didn't remember it. All he remembered was this spirit coming into him and losing consciousness. And he's like, you were speaking in tongues. You were thrashing. You attacked me. Look, I'm bleeding. It's like, oh my God. It would get them in fights. It would steal one of their objects and blame the other one. It took his guitar pick. He later found it in the garage, in the dishes that had been taped up for years. They were unpacking. Like, go get my dishes. We haven't had. There was his guitar pick that he had railed his friend for stealing.
Oh, how did he get rid of this thing?
He never did.
No.
He just ignored it, and little stuff would happen. He's profoundly psychic. He's a medium.
Oh, okay.
He doesn't know it. And he was one of my earlier ghost interviews, so I wasn't super educated on how to, deal with it. I, definitely counseled him as best as I could, but I didn't fully understand what was going on. But he's absolutely, in hindsight, a medium, because he described quite a few experiences that were paranormal across the lines.
Yeah.
So I think that they're particularly vulnerable to spirits, because spirits can see them.
Yeah.
A person who is a psychic medium or psychic puts out a light that's visible in the astral planes from miles away, and spirits line up to communicate with them.
It's like a blood in the water for a shark, right?
Exactly. But it's a light in the darkness.
Yeah, light in the darkness, right? Yeah, and that could attract just about anything. So you have to be careful out there. Like you said, you can't just pick up Ouija boards and think something good's going to come of it.
And evil spirits don't like goodness, and they will do their best to derail that as well. And you can see that when you do this research, like people who are trying to do good things and are really amazing people and philanthropic. You can see this with a lot of the stories of the saints as well. End up with demonic attacks.
Yeah.
Padre Pio talked quite a bit about that. I love Padre Pio. That man could do anything. He only spoke Spanish, but he could understand everybody who came to visit him. People saw him all over the world. He never left his church in Spain physically. He stayed there. People were seeing him everywhere. He was seen levitating. He brought a person back from the dead. He made fruit trees bloom in winter. He did almost anything that is, we are unlimited in our abilities.
Yes.
The person who is approaching enlightenment starts to manifest all the abilities that we have on the other side and more. I mean, the things we can do are cool. It's so cool.
Are magical creatures. It's just, but the good thing is that a lot of people are awakening. We're going through this era where a lot of people are awakening to it. And I think more people are trusting in that ability in themselves, which is a good sign, I think.
Yeah. And I also think that as we continue our incarnations and gather wisdom, which is inevitable. And if you're traveling, if you've finally chosen the path of goodness and you're meditating and you're moving along, it's inevitable that at some point you start to do that, unless you choose the other way.
Right.
You're going the other way.
And there are a lot of people that choose the other way, unfortunately. But that's a whole nother interview.
Exactly. But I think it's inevitable that people start to manifest these abilities. Sooner or later, people are going to have the out-of-body experiences and all of these. It awakens naturally in a person, like a flower blooming.
Yeah.
With enough sunshine and water, sooner or later, you blossom into your full potential, inevitably. Or you don't, because you never got the light and water, or you made poor decisions. But most people, sooner or later, finish the incarnations on Earth. They learn what they can learn here, and they go on to learn bigger and greater lessons and explore this infinite universe.
Which is why we're here, right, Preston?
I'm ready to graduate. That would be fun. I've Like, yay! Guess
Right,
Robert Monroe. I may have mentioned this, but I love this quote. Robert Monroe is a very well-known out-of-body guy. He's
yeah.
passed on, but he's one of the best ever at it. And he was told on the other side by spirits that people who graduate from the Earth School are highly respected on the other side in the higher dimensions. And that made me laugh because I'm like, yeah, I hope so, because Earth is a rough school. It's not easy to pass.
The school of hard knocks. That's for sure.
So kudos to anyone listening to this here, because you chose this school. Congratulations. I'm proud of you. Let's graduate. I can't wait.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm done. What are you working on in closing? What are you writing a new book? Like, tell us some of the exciting stuff you're working on.
Always got irons in the fire, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm still, of course, doing lots of meditating and out-of-body experiences, and going to be putting out another book on that shortly.
Nice.
I'm working on another UFO book. Currently, my latest, most exciting project is the sequel to Symmetry, a true UFO adventure about Dolly Safran, because her lifelong experiences, well, we covered a good bit of it in Symmetry. Honestly, if we didn't, it's a lifetime of experiences. And it's so frustrating because every time, I go on, I do an interview with her, I'm like, no, just the other night. I'm like, gosh, you didn't tell me this. This wasn't in the book. We're doing a whole sequel to that and diving deeper into some of her experiences, but more about the ET knowledge itself and what they can teach about science and spirituality and that sort of thing. And try to lift people out of the delusion and ignorance that is choking our society right now.
Right. Oh, I love talking to her. I can't wait. I'm going to be reaching out to her shortly. Send her my love. So when is Symmetry 2? When do you expect a publication?
This year. I'm aiming for May. That's optimistic, but I really think I can do it because we've pretty much finished the interviews. I'm so busy now with the YouTube channel and all the people coming at me, and interviews like this take up a lot of my. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely adore. I'm living the dream.
Yeah.
Doing what I love.
And people love you, and that's just not a compliment in the wind. You should read some of the comments that people leave on these videos. They just love listening to you, and it's really a symbiotic relationship you have with your audience.
Oh, very cool. Here's Duchess.
Nice. Oh, there's the baby.
She's a big one.
She's a big one. Her alone is the size of my dog.
She weighs as much as I do.
That's a great day, right?
Yep.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful animal. Well, Preston, thank you so very much. I could talk, I can't believe 2 hours passed. Talk about missing time. I think I'm sat here for another 2 hours. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you so much, Preston. And send my love to Dolly, and I will be reaching out to her soon. I can't wait to hear her side of this whole thing.
Oh, yeah. She's got a lot to say about it. She's more knowledgeable about a lot of this stuff than I am. Because she's experienced pretty much all of it. But,
I love talking.
Thanks for letting me talk about the paranormal and ghosts and all this stuff, because often it's just UFOs, and it's so important that people recognize it's connected.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, my pleasure. And I really am so in line with your school of thought on the whole thing. So it really reaches to the depths of me, and I greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to be reaching out to you again at some point.
Anytime.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Preston.
My pleasure, too. Thank you.
Take care. Bye, Dolly. Love you. Love you, too. I'll be talking to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Oh, my goodness. I'm always left speechless after I speak to Preston and Dolly both. And you just always get filled with so much information when you talk, so much different ways of processing the unknown. And that's what I greatly appreciate from them both. So again, thank you all so much for listening to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled. And of course, we're on United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, which is 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Please be sure to stay tuned to us. We have a live show every Thursday between the hours of 5 and 7 Eastern Standard Time. And we have a pre-recorded show now between the hours of 3 and 5 every Friday, and that's Eastern Standard Time as well. So thank you all so much. Please be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It means the world to me when you do. We've got to let the algorithm know that this information is worth understanding and learning, and the only way we can do that is by letting them know that you like it and love it as much as we do. Thank you so much, guys. Have a safe and blessed rest of your day. Bye-bye.